Renee Hobbs, and welcome to Media Logs. Today's date is November 2nd, and we're here for the third program in our year-long series. We are so delighted to have the support of the University of Würzburg, the University of Rhode Island, and the German Embassy in Berlin. Public Affairs section. So this year-long program brings together German and American educators and people from around the world to talk about all the new forms of disinformation and propaganda and all the important ways that we teachers and teacher educators need to prepare students for living in a complicated world where disinformation, propaganda, and forms of media bias are part of our ordinary life. Today's featured presenter is Troy Hicks. The program is called Digital Diligence. It's a concept that's coming from his work at the Summer Institute and from his new book. And Troy, take it away.
Thank you, Renee. I'm glad you gave the book plug so I don't feel so guilty. I have a new title that's come out, Mindful Teaching with Technology. Digital Diligence is there in the subtitle, and I will do just a little bit more information about that in a moment. So thank you again for inviting me to be part of the team. I very much have enjoyed working with all of you on the Media Logs project, and I'm very honored to be the webinar presenter for today. So Christina's going to help me monitor the chat. I do have the window open. I will try to keep that, might be mindful of the chat, but as questions come up, we'll go ahead and try to answer them. Also, you will have access to the slides as well as another digital handout. We'll drop the link to this in the chat in a few minutes once everybody's kind of joined in and we're ready to engage in an activity together. And I just also want to note that I'm really trying to build off what we've already seen from Diana Hess and Vanessa Otero, taking some of the ideas that they've already introduced and layering in this activity today. So when you get to the breakout room portion of our conversation a little bit later on, I'm hopeful that that will be really meaningful and useful for you. So yeah, I will just go ahead and grab a link to the book. And yes, there is a coupon code. Yay, everyone loves coupon code. So there's a book information there on my website and coupon code available if you're interested. So thank you for allowing me to share that. All right, so we're going to jump in here in a moment and start to think about this concept of being mindful and this concept of digital diligence that, again, thanks to Renee and Julie and everyone at the Summer Institute, as well as my work through the Chippewa River Writing Project at Central Michigan University and the National Writing Project more broadly, as well as other professional organizations like the National Council of Teachers of English and the International Literacy Association and the International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE. There are all these overlapping conversations about how we best use technology. And I want to begin thinking about that in meaningful ways. So I'm going to push this into present mode for a few minutes. I'll talk at you for just a few minutes, and then it will possibly take over your screen. So feel free to exit or escape out of that. And again, those who are just joining, we're going to drop a link in the chat here in a few minutes, and you'll have access to these slides and other resources as well. All right. So when we think about this concept of digital diligence and what we want our students to know and be able to do, when I started working on the book diligently or intentionally, maybe the best word to think about, when I really started to dig in and work on the book a few years ago, these were some of the dominant headlines that were coming up. So you might remember some of these. And of course, with things that have come out more recently about what happens when students and our children are using social media, the effects of what happens with that, there are even more detrimental effects that we're starting to see. And I've always been one to kind of think about why it is that we're looking at these kind of headlines, like where do we come at this topic? You know, what is the angle with which we are bringing our skills as English language arts and media literacy specialists? Where do we come at this topic? But of course, these were the headlines from 2017, 2018, 2019. We were worried about screen time. And so I began thinking, well, how do we help people have more productive and reasonable conversations about screen time, especially those of us that are trying to teach digital literacy skills? And then, of course, in the fall of 2018, there was kind of a, I don't know, I hesitate to use the word bombshell report, but it was a pretty major report. It was a series of 3 articles that came out from the New York Times. And in the Twitter-sized summary, the gist of the articles was that Silicon Valley tech people are having their kids jump away from screen time and go to schools where there's no screens. And basically, they know that screens are bad for our kids. And yet they're still trying to peddle all these wares and put kids on learning management systems and sell adaptive technologies and things like that. And then we had a pandemic. And then things changed even more. And so now when we think about what's going on and where we're at, again, this question of mindfulness and what is it that we want our students to do. Sorry about that. I just pushed us out of the main screen into that. I hope that's okay. I'll just leave it like that for now. What we want our students to know and be able to do with technology continues to change. So we're still in this moment where we have to figure out how best to deal with remote learning, to deal with the ways in which kids are being expected to use devices even more and more, or contrarily, how some students still don't have access to one-to-one technologies in their classrooms. I was just speaking with a teacher earlier this morning working on a project that we're working on, and she was saying that we've now gone away from one-to-one technology and we're back to computer carts in the classroom. And so we know that there's this constellation of challenges that are facing teachers, facing students, facing parents, facing administrators and policymakers too, as we think about how to use these technologies in productive and responsible ways. So that kind of brings us forward to this question. And I am curious to begin thinking about our conversations about digital access and usage, and even these questions of addiction. Are we actually asking the right questions? What are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking of ourselves, of our students, and of the technologies, let alone the pedagogies that we're using, in order to be more productive, in order to think more critically, more creatively, more carefully about the technologies that we're doing? And that's where I started to really come up with these ideas of digital diligence. And these aren't perfect. They're a work in progress, and we're going to talk a little bit about them. And you're going to try an activity today that I hope really emulates and gets you to think about things in a digitally diligent way. But I'm always looking for feedback. And of course, you'll have all my contact information and things like that when we share the document and the slides. So a few other things just really quickly, different research is showing different things. Again, these were snapshots from a few years ago from the Pew Internet Research Center, as well as a report summarized and reported out in The Guardian. You'll have links to these that you can go back and look at as well. I think that the idea is we're opening up the conversation for debate. And as we have the activity that we're going to be engaged in today, again, building off what we've learned from Diana and Vanessa earlier, hopefully we'll engage in that spirit of dialogue and continued conversation. So let me just offer a little bit more about my definition of digital diligence and where I'm hoping we'll go with this. And we'll pretty soon be moving into the activity. So at the core, I would define digital diligence as an intentional and alert stance that individuals employ when they're using technology, whether they're using these types of things, or whether they're using these types of things, or whether they're using this type of thing that I'm on right now. When using technology, including apps, websites, software, and devices for connected reading and digital writing, characterized by empathy, purpose, and persistence. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what those various qualities are, and also think about the ways in which that becomes enacted. So through the book, I've tried to kind of put out 6 buckets, I guess, for lack of a better term, of information clustered around a few big ideas. So the first big idea is teaching students how to protect their own privacy, thinking about when, where, why, and how they share information and with whom. The second big principle is to maximize attention, to think about when we're trying to be sold and having our attention sold to advertisers, and how we really focus and use our attention in intentional manners. Thinking about point 3 there, getting out of our own echo chambers and filter bubbles, looking at what algorithms are feeding us and how we can make sure that we're getting information from different sources. Then we look ahead to this idea that knowledge gets made and produced in different ways. There are different things that count as evidence for different communities in different contexts. And so we want to think about all of those questions about knowledge making and how different ideologies are represented in the knowledge that we consume. Then with number 5 and number 6, getting our students to move into that role of producing. So to build off some of Renee's work and one of her phrases that I really like to use, to create to learn, to move students into the process of being producers, to create digital products through digital writing applications like infographics, maps, timelines, slide decks, videos, websites, and then also to embrace connected reading, to really use all the tools that we have at our disposal for annotation and engagement. And so with all of that, we again are trying to figure out how does this fit into our conversation, the media logs that we're having this fall, and building our learning community that will launch really in full in the winter. Well, if we go back a couple of weeks, we talked with Diana Hess, who talked to us about teaching the controversies. She gave us a few really good frames for thinking. She talked about settled versus open issues. So issues that we really aren't going to debate anymore, whether suffrage for women and all people and not just rich white men is a good thing. We all agree that voting rights are good. The open part of that then is how we enact those policies. And so that was a really good frame for thinking, and hopefully will help guide some of our conversation today. Then just a few weeks ago, we spoke with Vanessa Otero, who introduced us to the media bias chart, and in all the good and bad ways that something like this, we look at it and we're like, oh, that's really helpful. It helps us see these things, but then it could become codified. And is this a shortcut? We had great conversations, though, thinking about how we represent press ideologies and figuring out where they fit and how to open up conversation about media bias with our students. So I'm trying to situate our conversation and our activity today within this broader arc of what we've already heard in the Media Logs program. So before I go forward, I just want to pause for a minute, see if there's anything that's come up in the chat. And actually, Christina, in just a moment, I'll have you get ready to drop that link to our digital handout in the chat as well. So anything that I should be pausing and taking notice of? I'm looking over at my chat window really quickly.
Yeah, right, Troy. Before I drop the link in the chat, I would like to make you aware of some comments in the chat. So some participants have been thinking about the cultural embeddedness of what you just outlined, yeah, maybe you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I see the note here that it's this notion of how tech is available and the systems of perception that are baked into the society or culture, varying across different cultural groups. So the value of technology weighs differently in different parts of the world, not only because of materiality, but also because of cultural beliefs. So I really appreciate that. All right. Oh, and thank you for the shout out. Really appreciate it. All right. Oh, yes. And the Undivided Attention podcast, I'd give that a shout out too. All right. So again, here we are. We're kind of in webinar 3. And today's idea, building on what we've done so far and connecting to digital diligence, will invite you and your breakout room group to engage in an activity here that I'll explain in just a moment. All right. Oops, we're not going to listen to Diana right now as much as I'd love to. You can go back and watch the recording later. All right, so what we are going to do is really try to dig into one of the lessons in the book. I call it Seeking and Seeing Alternative Viewpoints. So one of the things that we know, we've already talked a little bit about in the series, and we know from our own social media feeds and our own customized Google searches, is that sometimes we get caught in our own echo chambers. We see things that the algorithm feeds to us because the algorithm thinks that's what we want. And it's really hard sometimes to break out and to find different information. So we need to actively, in a digitally diligent way, go seek that information. But even when we find that information, it can sometimes be difficult, so we know to see the difference. So we know that we're told, oh, open up multiple tabs and read across sources and do these things. But until we really critically examine headlines and dominant images, and what I will show today, word clouds, which help us take a step back from the text, it's hard to fully understand and see those ideologies being present. We can read two articles about the same idea and we go, well, yeah, I can see they kind of disagree here and they kind of disagree there, but how and why? And that's especially hard for a student. So my hope is that this activity that we're kind of going through today will give you a tool to enact some of the pedagogies that we've already been talking about. And again, to think about helping your students make those choices so they can find sources that are useful for them. All right. So what we're going to do in a few minutes, I'm going to walk you through this kind of together. Then we're going to open up that digital handout and you're going to have time in the breakout rooms, is to take an adaptation of lateral reading. So Sam Weinberg and his team, Sarah McGrew and others at the Stanford History Education Group, introduced this idea of lateral reading a few years ago, where they were talking about how fact checkers read on the internet. They open one source and then rather going to the about page and the contact page and other things on the main page, they open up multiple tabs to figure out who that source is and what they're saying. I also think it's important to think about lateral reading in the sense of what we can do with tools like All Sides or Gale's Opposing Viewpoints in Context or ProCon, where we can open up multiple tabs on a topic and see those perspectives. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking lateral reading. There's a great episode of the Crash Course Navigating Digital Information about lateral reading. And again, you'll have links to this slide deck so you can go back and watch John Green do this in a much more humorous and entertaining way than I am right now. But that whole series is really built on some of the work of the Stanford History Education Group, especially this episode on lateral reading. So my definition is a little bit different, and we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to show you what I mean by demonstrating it here on the screen. The other thing that I want to really kind of bring out today is a piece out of a journal article that I ran into a few years ago that really, for me, crystallized this idea that language is so important. And we have to step back from these sources and look at the language in a different way by thinking about the ideologies that are at play. And so you'll have a link to the source, and I'll actually walk you through this in just a moment. And I only pulled two of about, I don't know, they have probably, 15 or 20 different ideological markers that they kind of go through. And they outline a number of different things that we need to be thinking about when we see something like air pollution as a phrase in a news article. Well, what does that invoke? You know, what is going on behind that phrase, as just one example? And so here I pulled a few of their examples about conservatism, what we in America would call the politically leaning right, as well as socialism or liberalism, which we would probably call more along the political leaning left. Now they do, interestingly enough, they do talk about liberalism in kind of the sense of libertarianism, as I think we would call it in the US. So as you look through these ideological markers in the activities, you'll want to just kind of be thinking about, how these are represented sometimes in the US and sometimes in Germany in slightly different ways. But we're going to look at those markers, and we're going to try to then dig in and look at some articles. And so Christina had started this Padlet and gathered some articles for people who want to engage in a conversation around German articles and in the German language. I've added some articles that we can look at in English. I'm going to walk you through how we're going to do this. So in a moment, you are going to get a link to this handout. In fact, some of you might have already got it. I think maybe it's in the chat already, judging by my anonymous alligators and others who are on the document. So this is a view-only document. This is something that you can copy and make. You can either copy and add it to your own Google Drive, or you can download a version of it for yourself. So it's view-only. If you request editing access, I'm not going to give it to you. It's just view-only, so you have access to it and you can make a copy on your own. What we are going to do here is we're going to look at different articles and think about these ideological markers. So I want to walk you through this activity quickly before you go to the breakout rooms and engage in this dialogue. Again, I take this idea that we need to kind of step back from the text itself and to think about what it means from my friend and colleague, Tom Liam Lynch, who writes about this and has a website called Plotting Plots. And he calls this a distant reading of the text, where you take the text and you make a corpus of the text. So a corpus is what linguists would call just a big collection of words. And we're going to use a tool called Voyant to do that. And in fact, I've already done some of that work for you, and I'll show you how to get to that into the links here. So again, before I explain, I see there's a little more activity in the chat. Christina, are there any other questions that I should address before I kind of outline what people will be doing in their breakout rooms?
Yeah, there's actually one question that came up. If I understand it correctly, the question is about whether we should strive for consensus or cohesion in society, or or if controversy and diverging opinions are actually okay. Maybe you could respond to that.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful question. I think it is always, as a human and as a parent and as a member of a community and as an educator, I think we balance our own personal passions and a sense of empathy.
Can I tell the question, sir?
So
am I having a liberty to tell a question, sir?
I'll let my colleagues double check and make sure we might help that participant meet.
I think the person who asked the question would like to rephrase.
Yes, jump in.
What I mean is, as educators, we need a society of cohesion for better development. So we don't wish that people get divided because of smaller political affiliations. And in a similar fashion, when one party is in power, they should not divide the people based on the affiliation to a party. They should give all the benefits to all the people. That's this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I interrupted you a moment ago. So yes, I would agree. I would say a yes and by understanding some of these ideologies that are at play, I think we can open up broader conversations. And so I'm reminded of things like StoryCorps or living room conversations or Hi from the Other Side that give us ways to open up dialogue and to think about, well, why do you have that perspective? Tell me about a formative experience in your life. Tell me about your beliefs about this topic or that topic. Let's not talk about the news, just tell me why this is an important value to you. And I think that by looking at some of these things, when someone can say that, oh, well, I actually do have a strong faith, or I do believe in family traditions, that's a more generative conversation than having a conversation about the particular topic alone. And hopefully this activity will emulate that. And then again, I agree, as educators, we're trying to get people to bridge divides. We also want them to understand the basics of academic argument and how to have civic dialogue. Again, going back to what Diana taught us a few weeks ago, where are the things that they're closed issues, like they're settled issues. We're not going to have a conversation about whether climate change is happening, but we can have an open conversation about policies to implement for climate change. So, all right. So what's going to happen here in just a moment? You have this document. You're going to go into a breakout room with some colleagues and open up a conversation. And we have this great Padlet. Again, thanks to Christina for getting this started. And let me just kind of emulate this for you. I'm going to do one in English, if that's okay. We do have 4 German breakout rooms. So if you would prefer to be in the German breakout room, I think Renee is trying to make note of that. And maybe you could send her a message in the chat so she can make sure she gets you to the correct breakout room. But I'm just going to pick this one for right now. So let's say I'm in group 5 and I'm looking at this topic of policing in America. And we are going to go in and we're just going to kind of quickly look at these 2 articles. So I'm going to click. And what's great about Padlet is I can easily open that up into a new window. So I'm starting my lateral reading. So I've got the story from ABC News, and I've got another story from Yahoo News, which was actually curated, I believe, from, yes, it was curated from the Star Tribune in Minneapolis on Yahoo News. So I'm going to go in with my group. We're just going to kind of quickly skim through and read the articles. We're going to look at the main picture and the headline. We're going to look at the main picture and the headline. This one happens to have a video, interestingly enough. Let's pause that for a moment. We don't need that going in the background, but I can go in and just kind of skim through the article and think about it. That's going to give you one layer of your first response. So with your first part of this response, you and your group are going to talk about this question. Well, who created this message? What do we know about the ideological leanings of this source? Which, if you'd like, you could go back to Vanessa's media bias chart and at least get one insight on that. And then you're just going to talk a little bit about what you know about those two things. Now, if you'd like, you can certainly take some notes in here. And maybe you notice something about the headline. So again, for group 5, oh, I noticed that in the headline, oh, they use the word only, the only Minneapolis officer. That's kind of interesting. This one, on the other hand, is focused on Minneapolis police officers, but it's kind of focused on them more broadly, like as a plural, like all the police officers. So you and your partners might just jot down a few notes, or you might do it alone. If you decide to create one of these and copy it and share, you can, or you could just, grab a Post-it note and jot some things down there. Then you're going to look at that main image. So we clearly see two different images here. So here is an image of the officer at home, apparently, just in a room in her home. Here we have images of officers on patrol and from the body cam footage. The next element then is going to say, let's look at the word cloud. Now, again, what I did, and try to save you some time, you can create these word clouds on your own with Voyant, but if you click into the corpus and you say, I want to look at what Article 1 looks like, and I want to look at what Article 2 looks like, I'm going to click on those links, and I'm going to be able to see the two different word clouds. So here's the first one from ABC News, and you can start to see what are the dominant words. And you can even adjust it. It's at 55 words right now. You could take it down to 25. That gives you a little cleaner word cloud to look at. Same thing over here. So you see police, people, officer, officers, footage, main words that are really important. What do we notice when we look at the article from Yahoo via the Star Tribune? We see the name of the officer, said is mentioned a lot, police, the word sexual, compliant, officer, Minneapolis, department, harassment is in there. So what are the words that appear and why are those words important? So you can have a conversation around those and take some notes. You might also think about the types of evidence that is being employed. Are there quotations? Who are they quoting? Are they politicians? Are they people involved in the incident? Are they people on the street that were interviewed? What kinds of statistics might they be using from polls or from other scientific studies? So you can think about the types of evidence that are apparent in the article. So do we see quotes or things? Do we see stats, anything like that? Do we see appeals to authority like the Minnesota Department of Human Rights or other things like that? And then finally, you're going to have a conversation about those ideological markers. Now you can get to that link of that PDF again when you click in here. And then I should have maybe linked directly to the PDF. I apologize for not doing that. You'll just have to click into the PDF document right here. And those ideological markers, this is about a 31-page PDF. So I think you got to go down to about page 17 or 18. There they are. They're page 17 in the PDF is where they kind of start. So you and your group can have a conversation around those ideological markers. So again, and I'm going to paste this in the chat. You're about to be put into breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you to dig into those headlines and to think about what you see. And here's all your prompts. They're kind of in the chat. And again, you are going to have a link to this document. So if you just joined us now, we'll drop a link to that shared document again. If your group decides to make a copy of it and share it together, that's great. If you just want to work on it on your own, that's great too. What questions do you have for me before you spend some time in breakout rooms? I'll put the questions up here as well.
So you're really inviting us to have a conversation about ideological framing by observing and noticing patterns in the word clouds. Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, your group, you're going to be assigned. So let's say I'm in group 5, right? I'm going to be assigned to room 5, and I'm going to be looking at these 2 articles, and I'm going to be trying to just read. Now, actually, I have my ad blocker on. I forgot about that. So I'm not getting all the other things that would come up on these websites right now. And you can see I have Ghosterly on too. So it's telling me I'm being tracked by 17 different advertisers right now. I'm being tracked by 13 different advertisers right now. So that's all part of the digital diligence thing. We're going to kind of save that for now. But yeah, you're going to look at those 2 articles. You're going to look at those word clouds, and then you're going to use these prompting questions as well as the table here to just have a conversation. What do you see? What do you notice? And then ultimately, what can you say about how these stories are being presented through these 2 different news outlets and what that may have to say about the ideologies of those news sources? So great question, Renee. Thank you. What other questions might you have? Oh, someone just asked me in the chat privately. I use a tool called Ghosterly, and I'll find a link to that and give you the link to that when you come back from the breakout rooms. And I don't know if anyone else from group 6 wants to jump in and say anything about our conversation. Feel free to jump in real fast.
I think from the discussing these 2 articles and feel the chart, I learned a lot how to do this kind of deeper discourse analysis and can have really a very obvious different attitude towards 2 different articles. So the Stanford's lateral reading is really a good way to compare different articles, but choice perspective is really very kind of useful to know deeply about the 2 types of article and know better the author's perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. All right. Well, let's hear from some other groups, and there's probably things that are coming up in the chat too. Well, Pamela, yeah, the word clouds. We got hung up on the word clouds in our conversation. That was that distant reading, as Tom Liam Lynch would call it, was helpful for us. So what came up for other groups?
Well, I'm gonna speak briefly. We apologize. We were a little bit behind picking up on how to work the Padlet and the ideology and so forth and the cloud. But we got engaged in a conversation, and finally at the very end, we took the article because it was the only time that we have left to do something that you opened, Troy, the one for the police in Minneapolis. And we tried to compare the title with the first 3 paragraphs and how we will approach that in a classroom, either 8th grade, 9 or 10 in high school or something like that. And we found few various marks, for example, that the element of being a police, being a woman, being gay, and having a complaint about the issue that is discussed in the article. And those are very delicate issues. And being in the classroom with a lot of students bringing in their own biases we have to ask them first, what they think, and then approach by each mark at a time, because all of them together, it can become a mess. And so it has to be broken down and discussed in a classroom. And that's how we ended our conversation.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Marta. I appreciate how your group was picking up on a number of the intersections that were present for that police officer. And again, then pulling that lens back out to think about the ideological markers could be really important. Wonderful. There's some great comments coming up in the chat, but if anyone else would like to take the mic, we maybe have time for one more group to report out.
We did the Let's Go Brandon articles, and I think what came in a big way for us was the tone of each article. So it was CNN and Breitbart, and the word clouds reflecting different CNN article referenced, which we love, the cheeky conservatives who want a phrase and kind of address the playfulness of it, whereas Breitbart is like, the Democrats are terrified and this is a revolution. And so we talked about tone, and then we talked about evidence, like what CNN uses evidence, which was a lot of, they were actually referencing conservative media responses to discuss how conservative media is doing this, and then referencing Breitbart, really no evidence at all, just a lot of assumptions and things like that. And I don't know if anybody in the group wants to add.
Yeah, Gina, that's exactly right. We really had a good time comparing and contrasting those two articles. And while we were doing that, I pulled up, Troy, the PDF about the different ideologies. And it seemed to me that you could really see the difference between kind of anarchism with the Breitbart article and liberalism with the CNN article. So I do think that if you're looking for an on-ramp to introduce ideology and vocabulary words related to it, this is something pretty approachable, I think, because it was evident from the language use in the article that those different ideologies were present.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on that really quickly. When I was looking for those articles yesterday, one of the things that All Sides does is they will label things as opinion and analysis. So you can see that this is an analysis article from CNN, and then it looks like there's the Breitbart one is labeled as opinion. So I tried to go for ones that might be a little bit more evocative, so to speak, for that one. But again, that would then be interesting to go in and take a look at it and just see, well, maybe the Hill actually tells us what Let's Go Brandon is about, and it's not quite as politically inflamed. All right, this is a wonderful conversation. My hope is that I've tried to tie together some of the themes from our conversation earlier with Diana and our more recent conversation with Vanessa. Again, you have access to this slide deck, so you can copy and use the slide deck in whatever way you see fit. If you need a copy, like, oh, wait a minute, Troy, I goofed up. I typed all over my copy of my Google Doc and I need it again. Well, there it is again in the chat. You're able to go ahead and copy that and make it your own. So I will come to a pause now because I know we have some housekeeping to take care of here at the end. And
let's give Troy a round of applause for that wonderful modeling of a lesson that I can use next week or tomorrow with my learners, and I'm going to give it a try. We're going to put the materials and resources that Troy just shared in this button on a website called Extras, and that's going to start to pile up over a while. But I want to share with you what's next because we're really excited about what's next. Next week, which is 2 weeks from today, we're featuring a program called Data Detox for Youth. Our presenter for this program is Daisy Kidd from Tactical Tech. Tactical Tech is a Berlin-based NGO that addresses issues of disinformation and propaganda, looking at how digital technologies change society and how they affect autonomy and agency. The curriculum that we're going to be looking at, Data Detox for Youth, is available in English and it's available in German, and we invite you to look at it. But Daisy is going to model some learning activities from inside that lesson, and we'll have another great opportunity to engage in dialogue. Even after only 3 sessions, Silke, I can see how this is working as we're building a kind of toolkit and some practice at talking cross-culturally and interculturally, and I can't wait to see what happens next. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll wave goodbye now, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us. Bye now.